Every Indian tonight. The slowdown in the economy has deepened and it's official now, because the big takeaway is that the Q1 growth for 2019-20 has dropped from 5.8 to 5%. Now this growth is the worst in over 6 years, stretching back to 2013, which effectively means that the Narendra Modi government now slips behind the growth rates during the Manmohan Singh years. India falls also behind China in growth. Manufacturing has fared the worst. Growth has dropped to 0.6% in 5 of the 7 sectors where there has been a slowdown. So clearly, the government on the back foot.
The quarterly GDP estimates for the quarter ending June 2019 indicate that India's GDP growth, while still high, has shown some slowdown. The government is quite alive to the situation, especially global headwinds arising out of deceleration in the developed economies and Sino-American trade conflict has contributed to the slowdown.
This government has no idea what is happening in the economy. It is the most distressing news that we heard today, that the growth rate has fallen to 5%. In now 25 quarters, the growth rate is falling. Unfortunately, the government has no answers. If demonetization and the proper implementation of GST had taken place, would the growth rate be down to 5%? People are losing jobs by the thousands. The government seems to be diverting issues everywhere else. There needs to be an economic emergency in this country, because we are sliding down so fast and the government doesn't seem to have a clue.
It's a worrying situation. The GDP figures are a living proof of the fact that BJP has single-handedly committed a cold murder of the Indian economy. The manufacturing indexes are down. The GDP is at a record low. Today, the BJP government is still in a celebration cheerleading mode rather than a corrective mode. The BJP is that doctor which has given a lethal dose of death, of unemployment, industrial growth, manufacturing growth to a patient on ventilator. The government should apologize, declare a national emergency.
Strong words coming in there from the opposition, but the government seems at the moment keen to push ahead, they say, with more reform and a booster dose for the economy. Finance Minister Nirmala Sitharaman, just an hour before those GDP figures came out, announced the amalgamation of 10 public sector banks into 4 big banks. After this, the total number of public sector banks in the country will come down to 12 from 27 in 2017. Is this enough? Listen in to the Finance Minister.
Punjab National Bank, Oriental Bank of Commerce and United Bank will be brought together, and they shall form the second largest public sector bank with business of 17.95 lakh crores.
It was a reform long in the waiting. Finance Minister Nirmala Sitharaman has brought in big bang public sector banking reforms, even as the country grapples with an unprecedented crisis in the financial sector. The government is merging PNB, Oriental Bank of Commerce and United Bank to form India's second largest PSB. Canara Bank, Syndicate Bank will be merged. It will be 4th largest public sector bank. Andhra Bank, Union Bank and Corporation Bank will combine to form India's 5th largest bank. The merger of Indian Bank and Allahabad Bank will form the 7th largest bank. The number of public sector banks is now down from 27 to 12.
Banks will now operate to target our 5 trillion economy and give the necessary support for the banking facilities which is so required by our customers today.
The merger will give the banks more lending capacity. They will have a wider reach. There will be significant cost rationalization. There will be better technological integration. And most importantly, the new entities will have more room to handle bad loans. The RBI annual report on Thursday had said bank frauds have increased to 71,543 crore rupees in 2018 to 19, but the finance minister was more optimistic.
December 2018, if you had 8.65 lakh crores, now the asset quality has improved, NPAs have come down, and the level at which they are today is only 7.90 lakh crores.
The government hopes that the merger of 10 banks into 4 giants will improve lending and resolve the crisis in the financial sector. Any increase in demand and consumption and ultimately the recovery from slowdown could depend on how quickly the banking sector cleans up its mess. With Aishwarya Paliwal in Delhi, Bureau Report, India Today.
From tonight, every night for the next few days, we will have a ground report on the state of the economy. For a moment, just forget what the politicians say. This is the hard reality. We're going to start today with the bicycle units in Ludhiana that are in big trouble following poor liquidity and pending GST issues. Our ground report on this special series on an economic emergency starts from Ludhiana.
The poor man's mode of transport. The rich man's fitness fad. Everyone has the humble bicycle at home, but even the cycle seems to be out of favor in these times of slowdown. Ludhiana, the hub of cycle manufacturers, is facing its worst phase in almost 30 years. They claim the production is down to 20%. A top cycle manufacturer, which used to produce up to 17,000 cycles per day, now makes just 6,000 to 7,000 units per day. The industry says an unprecedented liquidity crunch and delay in GST refunds have hit them hard. They claim the state government also owes them money in the form of VAT refunds not paid for the last 8 years.
The biggest challenge before this cycle industry is the GST on the raw material, which is 18%. The manufacturers are saying that the refund is taking too much time, and besides there are other challenges as well. The biggest challenge is also being posed by the China.
Government should reduce the GST and make sure that we don't have to wait for the refunds. Bicycle being a poor man's vehicle, it is desired that they should reduce the tax and give more incentives and instruct banks to give us more funds for our expansion.
Besides delayed GST refunds, the cycle industry is also facing the challenge of technology upgradation. The customers now prefer modern machines, which are costly and at times tough to afford.
आजकल डिमांड थोड़ी सी हाई एंड साइकिल की ज़्यादा हो रही है। उसमें हम चाहते हैं कि हमें टेक्नोलॉजी टफ स्कीम के अंडर लाया जाए, जैसे अभी इन्होंने हौजरी को टेक्सटाइल को दिया है कि टेक्नोलॉजी अपग्रेडेशन फंड कोई रेस किया जाए और हमें दिया जाए फ्री इंटरेस्ट लोन पे, ताकि हम जो छोटे छोटे मेरे मैन्युफैक्चर हैं यहाँ पे हम उनको टेक्नोलॉजी के लिए अपग्रेडेशन कर सकें और मार्केट में उनका माल ज़्यादा बिके.
Currently, spare parts for the high-end bicycles are being imported from Japan, Korea and Taiwan. Manufacturers say China is posing tough competition as cycle parts manufactured there are cheaper.
चाइना 20 करोड़ साइकिल बनाता है, हम 1.5 करोड़ बनाते हैं. हमारे पास इतना बड़ा स्कोप है, हम 1.5 के 3 भी कर लेंगे, 3 के 4.5 भी कर लेंगे, तब भी हम सेकंड रहेंगे. लेकिन आप ये देखो कि हमारी इकोनॉमी कितनी फ्लरिश कर जाएगी अगर सरकार की हमारे पास पीछे से बैकअप हो.
Despite the slowdown, the manufacturers believe India's cycle industry has a huge untapped potential and can generate more employment opportunities. All it needs, they say, is a helping hand from the government. With Manjeet Sehgal, Bureau Report, India Today.
The big questions then tonight. India is staring at a long spell of an economic slowdown. Is it finally time to wake up and smell the coffee? Will the big bank mergers really revive the economy? Can they really be called reform? Is the Modi government still unable to find a real fix for the slowdown? How can the government jumpstart private investment? How can the government lift consumer sentiment? Just some of the questions we're going to raise tonight. Professor Arun Kumar, economist, joins me in the studio. Rajiv Dubey, editor, Business Today with us. Gurcharan Das, former CEO at Procter & Gamble and someone who writes extensively on the economy. Shankar Aiyar, author and columnist, joining me. Also Professor Santosh Mehrotra at JNU. And Amit Mallya, of the BJP. And I want to start with you, Amit Mallya, because as I said, is it time now finally to smell the coffee? For much too long, this government has been in denial over the state of the economy. Would you concede that today is the final wake-up call? 5% lower than the Manmohan Singh years, which you derided so often.
Well, let me just do some fact check here for you, Rajdeep. We are not at the level at which Dr. Manmohan Singh's government was in the fourth quarter of 12-13 and 13-14. But that's not really the benchmark that we have set for ourselves. So let me come to the more substantive points. Is the economy shrinking? And the answer is no, it isn't. Are we growing? The answer is yes. Perhaps we are growing slower than what we would have expected. Now, there are several reasons for it, and I will just pick up the subheadings under this big GDP growth number that we see. What has done well for us? Agriculture, which whole of last year we were told wasn't doing well, by the way, has grown at 2%, which is a marked improvement over 0.1 earlier on. The electrical and the utilities industry has shown a growth of about 8.6% over 4.3%, a massive jump, shows that there is demand at the grassroots level. Then you had transport, trade and hotel industry, which is basically your construction and others, which have grown at about 7.1% as compared to 6%. What hasn't done well is the financial services and manufacturing. And let me tell you why. Since today we had this big bank merger, what is the context to it? In 2008, the gross advances in the entire banking industry was about 18 lakh crore. By 2014, that number became 52.15 lakh crore, almost a 3 times jump. In 2014, the Manmohan Singh government that you're missing so fondly said that the NPA level is at 36%. We did an investigation, and in 2017 we found out that the NPA wasn't 36% but 82%. It is that legacy that we are carrying till date. Now, let me come to the positives.
The present growth...
Is the government seized with the situation on hand?
No, just a minute. The present growth... The present growth crisis has nothing to do with legacy issues. It's very easy to put all the blame of whatever has gone wrong on the Manmohan Singh government. But let's talk about 2019, April to June.
Can I finish, please?
Yes, you can.
Because you just interrupted my thought process. Nonetheless, let me tell you, the positive is that the government is completely seized with the issue. The last 5 years, we end trying to clear the banking mess, which was left behind by Mr. Chidambaram, who's now being questioned by CBI for reasons that are pretty well known to the country, and Dr. Manmohan Singh, who presided over the worst kind of corruption that this country has ever seen. But having fixed the banking sector and put in measures to provide further capital, which was upfronted, we saw those announcements come in recently. We put in the IBC, the NCLT, which meant that companies could not borrow indiscriminately from the banking system and leave them to fend for themselves. Having done that and having cleaned up the balance sheets of the bank and provided additional capital, the moment we got the mandate post-May, the first thing that we did is announced a big FDI impetus. You will have a lot more companies coming in, contract manufacturing taking off, and you have already seen that single brand companies such as iPhone and Amazon Eco are now setting up shops here. The America-China trade conflict is benefiting India as India is aggressively wooing companies and come here and set shop. We're talking about import substitution. All of that is happening. Lastly, let me tell you what we've done on the banking side. The bit of issues that were highlighted to us were twofold. One, the interest rate, which very recently the government announced that would be brought down. The lending will be linked to MCLR and repo rate linked products will be brought to the market. There has to be much more transparency. On the tax rate, we announced that 99% of the companies will now be on 25% corporate tax. So we're addressing all of these issues. Besides trying to usher in fundamental changes that we did over the last 5 years, whether it was labor reform or land, which, by the way, we were not allowed to pass legislation because we do not have the numbers in Rajya Sabha. Yet we worked with several state governments which were governed by the BJP because the Congress doesn't seem to be interested in bringing about any reforms. We managed that in Rajasthan while we had our chief minister there. We did that with Madhya Pradesh. We did that with Maharashtra. So a lot of work has been done. But to expect us to undo the messy legacy of the Dr. Manmohan Singh Chidambaram era in the last 5 years and put economy on a 9% trajectory is frankly desirable. We want to do it, and we will bring in the structural fundamental reforms required to take it beyond 7% to 9%.
Okay, I've given you exactly, you've spoken continuously almost for 4 minutes, and you seem to suggest to me, don't worry, be happy. This government has got the situation under control. So you've set the stage in a sense to widen this debate, and I want to ask all my panelists. You've heard the BJP representative Amit Mallya very articulately defend his government's position. Let's go one by one to each of you to understand very briefly your first comments. Is the state of the economy not as dire as we are trying to make it out? Is the media being unnecessarily dire about the prognostications? Why don't you start, Gurcharan Das? Do you agree with what Amit Mallya is saying?
Well, no, I don't agree mostly with what he's saying. The reality is today the situation is very, very serious. I mean, it's not just because the international climate has changed. It is because the fact that the slowdown started almost 5 quarters ago, and they were visible indicators.
He's blaming the Manmohan Singh. He's blaming the Manmohan Singh legacy.
The problem, we have gone.
He's blaming the Manmohan Singh legacy.
No. Let's take a look at the numbers. I mean, look, for a year ago, 5 quarters ago, our growth rate was 8.2%. It's now down to 5%. That's a drop of 3 percentage points. I want your Ludhiana story was illustrating, and let me just add to that Ludhiana story, that a 1% drop in GDP, 1% GDP creates 1.5 million jobs. Each job creates 3 indirect jobs. So that's 6 million jobs. Each job supports 5 people. That's 30 million people. So 3 crore people is 1% of GDP. The GDP has dropped 3 percentage points. So you're talking about bringing pain to 9 crore people. And that's a very serious thing. We knew a year ago, look at the corporate profits, were down to 2% of GDP compared to 7% of GDP in 2009. Our exports, we blame the international market for our problem. The reality is that in the last 6 years, from 2011-12 to 17-18, in these 6 years, our exports grew at 0%, whereas Vietnam's grew at 300%. So the fact is, a lot of it is our own problem. Let's not blame the international economy. Okay. And this big reform that has been announced today, yes. I'm sorry, it's not a reform. If they had just privatized one bank, dropped equity to 49% for one bank, I tell you the sentiment in the country would have changed. Because the problem we are facing goes back to the NPAs of banks. And all that political lending, that pressure, that today they're not lending because CVC, CAG, and CBI, they're worried about them. So all the wrong signals, unprofessional banking is what is the problem, and this particular it's not going to improve anything at all.
Shankar Aiyar, it's not reform? The government claims that the merger of banks will strengthen the banks. Do you believe it's only going to be another opportunity for the governments to control even larger size banks? Is this the reform that can really in any way get the economy back on track in terms of banks lending more freely, or do you believe the government is not addressing the key issues of driving consumption, of driving private investment?
Well, Rajdeep, there is the promise of the $5 trillion economy, and then there is the reality of the 5% GDP. Everything that has been said on behalf of the government on all the measures that they have taken, and yet consumption is at 3.1%, manufacturing is 0.6%. If electricity is growing at 8%, that is because we've added 24 million consumers in the rural household electrification program. And if electrification is rising, then why is manufacturing falling? So these are the issues that were. Coming to your question about the bank reforms, yes, it's a good diet plan and a good physiotherapy exercise plan for when the patient comes out of the ICU. What we are concerned now is that the patient is in ICU. So how are we going to revive private consumption? That should be the headline concern of this government. The fact that banks have been consolidated is good. It might yield some results or might be neutral 10 months down the line. But the fact of the matter is, whether it is 12 banks or 27 banks, they continue to be owned and managed by the government. Why can't the banks be transferred to a sovereign fund or a trust like in Temasek in Singapore, where the banks are government owned but are not politically managed, or trust like KfW in Germany, where the banks are partly government owned but are not managed? So the real reform is to get government out of sectors. India is one of the few countries with a large presence of the government in business. It continues to be India's largest industrial house. And these are the issues that haunt the government. The second big issue, the elephant in the room, is that there is a hole in the bucket in the government finances, and they must find the way to rectify that.
Well, they attempted that, they claim, earlier this week by borrowing or getting the transfer of funds from the RBI. But Professor Santosh Mehrotra, where is the real, do you believe that the government is attacking the problem in the wrong manner, not looking at the key areas of private investment and consumption at the moment, and not having solutions? And do you believe this problem stretches back to the demonetization days, post-2016, that we are now finally seeing the impact of that, plus, of course, the global headwinds?
Well, demonetization was an exogenous shock to an economy which wasn't doing that well in the first place. I think let's just recall what has been the trajectory of the constituents of growth since about 2012. So while Mr. Amit Mallya is absolutely right that the NPA problem is a legacy problem, the NBFC problem is not a legacy problem. The increases in frauds in the public sector banks is not a legacy problem. Let's just recall what the RBI report on frauds is saying, that on average it took the government system to discover, or the banks to discover frauds only on average in 22 months. It takes 22 months for a fraud to be discovered. For big fraud, it takes 55 months to discover them. What is this telling us? There are serious problems with the public sector banking system, which is what two previous panelists have already pointed to. So, you know, what I would just, humbly request the government economist is to think about the need for changing governance within the banking system. The fact that this convergence and this mergers have taken place is a good thing. China has only 4 banks across its economy, which is 4 times larger than us. We had 27, we are down to 12. It's a very good thing, but I'm not so sure this is the end. We need to bring in much greater competition, and that can only happen if you reduce government holdings and you improve governance. There's no point in putting more money into the banks, recapitalization of banks, in the absence of governance reform. I mean, that all three of us have said this repeatedly. But I think the problems go deeper than this. Let's just recall, why is it that consumption is low? Consumption is low, Rajdeep, because between 2012 and 2018, non-agricultural jobs have not been growing. Manufacturing jobs have actually fallen. Construction jobs have not increased very much. Only in services jobs have increased. Overall, the unemployment rate has risen. The result of that is that real wages, and this is an estimate that I have recently done using the NSS data, real wages between 2012 and 2018 have remained flat. Why should we be surprised? Jobs are not growing, both in rural areas as well as urban areas. The result is that consumption is slowing, or if consumption is being maintained by certain households, it's at the risk of savings. So household savings as a proportion of GDP has fallen between 23% between 2012 and 2018 from 23% to 17%, 6 percentage point decline in household savings. If household savings fall, why should we be surprised that private investment is also falling? Simultaneously, you have the NPA crisis. But then exports are not growing either. Finally, the fourth engine of GDP is public expenditure, and there's a silent fiscal crisis. Thankfully, we've got RBI money, more public expenditure, more capital expenditure, which will happen. But, you know, we are in a very serious situation.
Can I, Professor Arun Kumar, you have been among those who red flagged this a couple of years ago. You wrote a book post demonetization, and some of what you said then is coming to be true today. While Amit Mallya is right that particularly the banking sector crisis perhaps owes its legacy to the manner in which the UPA handled the banking sector with the NPAs, the problem of consumption seems to extend post-demonetization and worsened since then. The problem of jobs, the problem of private investment stretches back to 3 or 4 years. So there are some UPA legacies, but there are now some Modi legacies. He cannot now, Mr. Mallya or indeed the BJP cannot always turn back and say, look, this happened between 2009 and 14. Do you believe today is the final wake-up call in that sense?
I think the wake-up call has been coming, but we haven't been looking at it. We've been trying to deny it, and that's the problem. Let me say that this 5% rate of growth is based only on the quarterly data. And that data comes from the corporate sector.
Yes.
It doesn't include even the full organized sector, much less the unorganized sector.
And you've been saying that the unorganized sector is where the real problem is.
Yeah, it's declining. And that's 94% of the employment. And if 94% of the employment suffers, then income suffer, and that leads to crisis in the agriculture sector. Agriculture prices then decline. Therefore, unorganized sector plus agriculture together is the big consumption. That's 94% of your workforce. If, as the CMI data shows, you've lost 40 million jobs there. From 450 million, you've gone to 410 million. If 40 million jobs are lost, incomes are not rising, the number of hours of work available is not rising, then you'll have a consumption problem. When you have a consumption problem, then capacity utilization becomes low, then industry invests less. If industry invests less, then the growth declines. So these are the immediate reasons. Now, structural changes that you can do with banking, etc., are long term. We need to take the crisis at hand today, and we need to do something. So we need a package for the unorganized sector. When we cut interest rate, it's for the organized sector. It doesn't filter down to the unorganized sector. So the unorganized sector requires a package. We need to refocus our policies so the unorganized sector starts coming up, employment starts coming up, as Santosh rightly says. Unemployment has been a problem. Where do we create employment? That becomes a focus point.
Okay, so, that's a good point to look at solutions. Let's start with you, Rajiv. Today, the finance minister said, look, I'm merging these banks, and that's one way of, in a sense, making the banking system more healthy. There are others like Gurcharan Das, like Shankar Aiyar, who are saying improve governance standards, reduce government equity or government holds over the... That's the only way you will really transform the banking sector. That's reform. A merger is not reform. And besides, as is being suggested by some of the others, that's not the solution to the immediate crisis. What is the solution?
The solution to the immediate crisis, the reason why we are from 5.8 to 5, Rajdeep, is, there has to be an admission that this is, first of all, this is a demand and consumption-led slowdown. The government believes this is an investment-led slowdown, which is why they are working on banks, which is why they are working on capitalizing banks, emerging banks. Government believes all this is sorted, investment will start, people will start borrowing, investment will start coming. No way. Investment-led slowdown started 5 years ago. It's not today. They believe it's an export-led slowdown. No way. Export-led slowdown started 2013. This is what we are dealing with now, is just consumption and demand-led slowdown. All we need is transmit all of the repo rate reduction, 2.6%. To the consumer, only 1.1% has happened. ensure that there are cuts in direct taxes, in personal income tax and in GST for a duration. Don't say, I mean, this may not be forever. You can say this is for 3 quarters. Do it for 3 quarters, roll it back after 3 quarters. But announce something which will create demand and consumption in the economy. It will turn around the economy in 2 quarters.
Let's then look at solutions. Gurcharan Das, you start first. What is the solution that you see? What is the real solution that you see? Where would you start?
Absolutely. Well, you need, well, you have to create demand. Everybody's been saying that. And the reality is that infrastructure, housing, construction, these are areas that create demand because they put money in people's pockets and they will buy things, and then industry will start supplying them, and so that will create. And so now at this point,
would you go along with
the money.
Would you go along with
In fact,
what
let's
Rajiv
admit
says?
it.
Cut taxes?
The number.
Would you go along
the
with what
government
Rajiv
doesn't
says?
have the money, so the only answer. No, so the only answer is that no, I wouldn't just say that. Well, that may help too, but I would say that you load up front your target for disinvestment, which is 1 lakh plus crores, and starts actually selling off what you have decided to disinvest. That can bring you money. And don't say that the timing is not right. There's never the right timing. Just start disinvesting. Banks would be a good place to start, but you have a program. There are a lot of enterprises, the 1,854 PSUs in the country, 25% are dysfunctional. They are not producing anything, or they are constantly in the red. They are costing us 20% of the budget of the center and the states. Just start selling those, and this is the right time. Modi can do it because he's got the capital, the political capital. The time may not come again.
We are just seeing
this is what he should do.
But we are just seeing the reverse of that happening, particularly with the BSNL, where attempts are being made to infuse more money into these public sector units. Amit Mallya, you've been patiently listening while everyone is questioning the government at the moment. Give us the solution. Clearly, this banking merger is not the solution, it appears, unless you change governance standards, unless the government in a way disinvests from the banking sector. What you really need is to stir consumption to build demand, and that's not happened. You've got others saying that the unorganized sector has been completely left out. Give it a major package. None of that seems to be coming at the moment, Amit.
Rajdeep, since I'm in the minority of 6:1 on this very balanced panel, I hope you'll just hear me out.
It's not. Now,
First
come on,
of all,
Amit.
we're talking about GDP
these are all
numbers.
people. These are all people.
Yeah,
Let's be honest. None of them are politicians. None of them are congressmen.
I appreciate that. But let me just have my say.
Yes, please.
First of all, we're talking about Q1 numbers between April and June.
Yes.
This government got voted back in May, and within 2-3 months, it has put the ball in motion. So clearly, you don't expect that the measures that we announced in the last 2-3 weeks would have any bearing on the GDP number that have come for the period April to June.
Yes.
So give us some credit and breathing room there.
Okay.
Number one. Number two, we are seized with the matter. Number three, I heard everybody talk about banking sector reform. I have a banking background, and let me tell you that the state in which the banks were in 2017, had we rushed to privatize them, we would have got no worth for our money. So what did we do? We cleaned up the balance sheet, we infused capital, we are now merging them. We have to make our banks strong, we have to make them globally competitive, we have to scale them up, you have to get technology, you have to get governance. The announcements made today focus quite a bit on the governance side of it, saying what kind of boards you need to have, what kind of management do you need to have, and how they need to be independent of any influence. And in the last 5 years, Mr. Modi's government has not made any political appointment who were dialing to give a loan. That's a big, big difference between what we've seen in the last 5 years and before. Hopefully, someday we will have our banks which are strong enough, there will be demand for them in the market, and if at all you think privatization is a panacea, we will be placed to get our money's worth. We've already talked about Air India. The government is looking at to privatize it. As far as other PSUs are concerned, you have to take every PSU for what its worth is and decide. You just can't say privatize everything, sell it off for no money, and call it reform. That would be, I think, foolish. Okay. The other thing on the investment bit, demonetization you keep speaking about. The fact is that post demonetization, private investment went up, that people started investing more in organized sector, savings went up. Clearly no link between the gloom scenario post and the reality. The investment, this quarter alone, since we're debating, 4.4% is the investment growth, which is the gross fixed asset creation, as compared to 3.6% before. So numbers are saying something else. But I'm not saying that there aren't things that we need to do. We obviously need to perk up consumption. We need to get investments. Prime Minister has said in his interview that we are going to ensure that no banking professional in the public sector bank is penalized for taking a right decision. And that is a very, very important statement that he made, particularly on the bank of the NPA crisis that had hit the banking sector. These things will take time. We are looking at an economy that we want to fix for the next 20-25 years and not get bogged down by the temporary slowdown in the growth that we've seen in this quarter. And the government is on the right track. The announcements that have been made suggest so. The FDI that has been opened suggests so. We are there. We will get there. And clearly the organized and the unorganized sectors both will be big beneficiaries of what the government is proposing to do and has already taken the first steps.
I have limited time, but I want solutions. Shankar Aiyar, give us your solution. Where would you start?
Rajdeep, every major change in India's economy has come after a crisis. So let's say first that crisis is a feel-good factor. This government has used the Jalan panel's recommendations on how to get money out of RBI. The Jalan panel, there was a different Jalan panel which gave a report on government's expenditure management in 2015. I think they should look at it. They should look at creating a SPV or a trust and shift all public sector enterprises out. The government has really no business holding more than 26% even in strategic enterprises. The government should get out of the mindset that real estate is a four-letter word. They should revive real estate so that the real estate is at the intersection of the industrial and the agricultural economy, and that is where most non-formal jobs, seasonal jobs are created. Unless you do that, you cannot revive consumption. Okay. Third, I think part of what Rajiv says is appealing. Maybe you do a one-time transfer, or the thing to do is put money back into the economy, and how they do it and how they sort of sell it is the political answer.
Your solution, Professor Arun Kumar. What's the solution? Give me a solution.
Yeah. So, we have to see consumption is not going to rise on its own. Investment by the private sector is not going to rise on its own. The government revenue is falling short. It projected 17% is getting only 4%. Fiscal deficit will rise. To cover that, you got 1.96 lakh crores from the RBI. So that's not going to give you a stimulus. That's only going to balance the tax. Question is, are we going to allow the fiscal deficit to rise? Because unless the government increases expenditure, there's no other source of increase in expenditure. So a policy decision will have to be taken, because the fiscal deficit is already quite high. It's not 3.4%. As the CAG report said, it's more like 5.8%. Include the states, it becomes 8.8%, So already the fiscal deficit is quite high. How much more can you get? That's a political decision. Without that, you will not be able to increase expenditures in the economy in the immediate. Whatever structural reform you do is all in the long run. Second is, disinvestment is not an increase in investment. It's only from one hand to the other hand. So disinvestment is not going to increase investment in the economy. Third is, interest rate cut by itself is not enough. You have negative interest rates in Germany and slipping into recession. You've had in the 2007-8 crisis, when the interest rates went down to 0.5%, 0.25%, there was a liquidity trap, investment did not rise. So investment will not rise unless capacity utilization rises, and that will rise only when consumption begins to rise, and that will happen only if the government begins to pump crime.
Very quickly, Santosh Malhotra, your solution.
Well, I have 4 or 5 points to make, very quick. on exports, you know, our exports have been stagnant. Several people have pointed that out. And a very important reason for this is that the real effective exchange rate has actually appreciated by 20% in the last 5 years. You know, real effective exchange rate has to be allowed to depreciate, otherwise our exports are not going to go up in the current global context. Point one. Point two, let's use the RBI funds for capital expenditure. Capital expenditure as a proportion of GDP in the union budget actually fell from 1.4% to 1.3%. It must be now used to increase it. Thirdly, I believe that the banks must be leaned upon. Our public sector banks have to be leaned upon to transmit the rate reductions that the RBI has been engaging in. Now, even if the rate reductions were being transmitted, we have a situation where the real rate of interest at which people can borrow today is 2.5%. Real meaning the rate of interest minus the inflation rate. You know, no developing economy can on a sustained basis suffer a real rate of interest of 2.5%. The RBI will have to cut rates over a period of time. Fourthly, clearly monetize the land that the railways, that government has held for a long period of time. It needs to be used to raise public resources, and we need to plow back that into public investment. And divestment of public enterprises will also mobilize some resources, and over a period of time can be used to raise public investment. And finally, I think in these ways, as you mobilize public resources, I think it's possible for the government to provide packages for labor-intensive manufacturing industries. 5 industries in the labor-intensive sectors which account for 50% of all jobs. Those are leather, food processing, textiles, garments, and wood and furniture. Very important 5 sectors which have seen a decline in jobs in manufacturing in our country.
I'm going to give you the final word, Rajiv. Is it going to get worse before it gets better? You've always been telling me for the last year, you don't know where the bottom is.
Yes.
Amit Mallya is saying be patient.
We still don't know what the bottom is. We know that this quarter, July-August quarter is definitely worse than April-June quarter.
July-August is worse than April-June to July.
Yes, much of the decline that we are seeing in
July-August-September,
July to September quarter
will be worse than what you're saying, despite all the measures the government claims it's taking.
Till the end of August is definitely worse than the April-June quarter, which we can see. We know the numbers because you can see it in auto, you can see it in FMCG, you can see it in durables. So surely this one quarter is definitely worse. After that, let's see if the economy does turn around or it halts there, and then we start to see some growth. But July, September is surely not better than what we are seeing.
You got to be patient, is what the government says. Don't worry, be happy has been replaced by don't worry, be patient. Give us some time, says the Modi government. Well, they've got the political capital. Now they've got to focus on the economy. Just 1 10-seconder from you, Amit Mallya, because you have been a spokesperson. I want an honest answer. 1 hour before the GDP numbers came out, Nirmala Sitharaman did her press conference. Wasn't that classic headline management? Be honest. You were trying to manage the headlines, and that's part of the problem.
And optics.
And the optics. Very quickly.
Rajdeep, if your program is anything to go by, it surely doesn't seem to be something that we intended to do.
Okay.
So leave the decision for us to time our announcements. We know we've been given a mandate by this country and we respect that. If we have to make an announcement on a Friday after the market closes so that there is no trading, that could be the reason as well, and not headline management. Perhaps you always want to see the glass half empty, and that is where the problem is. And I'm telling you, it's a glass that is, even if you want to see it half empty, is half full of air.
Okay, we'll leave it there. Amit Mallya, always good to have all of you speak without any of the usual tutu mehme and such debates. Good to have a constructive debate on where the economy lies. Clearly, there is a serious problem, and at least the recognition seems to have now begun. Thanks very much to all my panelists for joining me. When we return,